And we have a very special guest with us today, Christopher West. Christopher, you're one of the most prolific, dynamic, and gifted teachers of Pope John Paul II's Theology of the Body. Thanks for joining us here on ClearVoice today.
It's my great pleasure, John.
Let me just get a little bit of background on you. Would it be right to refer to the theology of the body as the Christian or the Catholic response to the sexual revolution? Is that a right way to think of it?
It could be framed as that. John Paul is basically saying to the modern world, okay, you want to talk about sex? Fine, but we can't stop at the surface. We have to go into the depths of what Scripture calls the great mystery of our creation as male and female and the call of the two to become one flesh. And if we do that, John, we will find ourselves at the very heart of the gospel message itself.
So is teaching people these tenets your way of helping to proclaim the new evangelization?
Without a doubt. The new evangelization and the theology of the body go together like peanut butter and jelly, if you will.
Yeah.
It is a culture of death out there. And the reason it's a culture of death is because we don't understand the meaning of our creation as male and female and the great mystery of our sexuality. John Paul II said it's an illusion to think we can build a culture of life if we do not live and embrace God's plan for our sexuality. So spreading the theology of the body is an integral part of the new evangelization, for sure.
Okay, and along those lines, Christopher, your new book, Fill These Hearts, it hopes to relate those ideals to people. Tell us how.
Well, you know, it's called Fill These Hearts for a reason. Who can't relate when Bruce Springsteen sings, "Everybody's got a hungry heart"? The question is, what are we hungry for? And the way we answer that question is really going to determine the whole course of our lives. There's a deep yearning that we all have for love and for union. And we can see through the theology of the body that even our bodies tell this story of God's plan of love. A man's body does not make sense by itself. A woman's body does not make sense by itself. But seen in light of each other, we see this call to holy communion. And that holy communion, John, of man and woman is just a foreshadowing of the eternal union of Christ and the church that the Bible describes as a marriage. So the goal of my book, Fill These Hearts, is to learn with God's grace how to direct our desire according to God's design so we can launch to our destiny, eternal union with God in the marriage of Christ and the church forever. In the book, I say there are basically three gospels. And a lot of us grow up in Christian homes with what I call the starvation diet gospel. And by that I mean we're given a list of rules to follow, but we don't understand how these rules connect with the desires of our hearts. And in fact, we're often told our desires are bad and we need to repress them. And then we go after what I call the culture's fast food gospel. And by that I mean the culture's promise of immediate gratification for our hunger. Well, if we eat that, we're not going to be very healthy. That's a picture of me in my college years. I had been raised with the starvation diet. Then I went to the fast food and I was sick. And I remember crying out, God, there's got to be something more. And making a long story short, what I discovered was this theology of the body, and it welcomed me into the banquet, what Christ calls in the Scripture the wedding feast. This is what our hungers are for, a wedding feast.
So you hit on a lot of points I was going to ask, so I'll go to my next question about the reason I came across your book initially was through the tour. You have a Fill These Hearts tour. And I think that was it sparked in me a lot of what you're talking about. Do you think when this book comes out, if you continue this tour, that people are starting to understand what you're driving at and that perhaps this is maybe a reawakening in the church that is much needed?
Well, without a doubt, John, there is a hunger out there. You know, we have either been raised on this starvation diet or we've been presented with the fast food, and neither satisfy. So without a doubt, in my work, whether I'm out speaking or on the Fill These Hearts tour or through my books and the feedback I get from my books, I often hear people saying, my gosh, I went to Catholic schools my whole life and never heard this. Why not? So there is a great hunger out there, and I think we're on the verge of a new springtime. John Paul II said this very often. We are on the verge of a new springtime, and there are many, many signs of hope. And I'll point to one right now in the culture. It's the movie Les Mis. You know, this movie has made such a splash, and it's been nominated for all these Academy Awards, and I talk about it in my book, Fill These Hearts. And I think what Les Mis demonstrates is when we take our desires to the wrong place, it ends in misery, in despair. But the final message of this movie is that these desires we have for love, for happiness, for redemption, for mercy, for forgiveness, these desires end in a glorious, happy ever after. And that's the stuff of our fairy tales. That's the deepest desires of our heart. We want an infinite bliss, an infinite satisfaction. And the good news of the gospel is precisely this: an infinite bread has come down from heaven to satisfy our hungry hearts. That's what my book, Fill These Hearts, is all about.
Well, I'm sure people will find a lot of answers there that they weren't aware were out there. And we wish you the best of luck with your book and the tour as you continue, Christopher West. Thank you very much for your time today.
Appreciate it, John. So glad to be with you.
Thank you.